Hello, I'm Fili, and this is SEO in 2024.
Fili, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
Optimize for page speed, or specifically site speed. It's not just individual pages. We really want to do the entire website. And we are talking here about things like core web vitals, but not just that. Also how you approach your code base, like JavaScript. Do you use JavaScript in the backend, etc.? Do you serve dynamically pages or not? This kind of stuff.
Understood. Okay, so you jumped straight into JavaScript there. Is that something that you're seeing impacting site speed more than many things?
Yeah, it can. So JavaScript is a great coding language, scripting language, and it has gained popularity in the last few years. But with that comes also that JavaScript isn't necessarily the most efficient language. And we see a lot of people having JavaScript as a backend, not just front-end, but also backend. And when they do need to hydrate their pages or, pre-render their pages, their content, in order to optimize the delivery of the actual content to the user. And not everyone is doing that. So that's one of the things that can most definitely be optimized. Now, on the other end, when we're talking about front end and when we're talking about JavaScript, one of the things that we see a lot as well is JavaScript dependency, where, for example, JavaScript is used to render or to inject critical technical SEO elements or content elements. And in principle, although, again, JavaScript is a great language, unless you have a sophisticated app, and I'm thinking think like a game or something like that, think like a designer app where you design something, the individual landing page should not be that dependent on JavaScript to render, to result, to give content. There's actually a very interesting study that happened a little while ago, where they, from the UK government, tested out who has JavaScript disabled, and is this primarily, for example, blockers or people who are very sensitive to privacy and they block JavaScript. And what turns out to really be the case is every user is a user without JavaScript until JavaScript is loaded. So it's basically every user potentially. And then on top of that, network issues, including mobile phone connections, etc., but also blockers or firewalls or other reasons may block the occasional, not for every single request, also not for every single user, but as you surf and browse the web, certain JavaScript files may not actually always render. And if your website is dependent on that, that can actually cause an issue. Now, that is on top of the fact that JavaScript also has a potential rendering cost. Not just on the Googlebot side, because if you inject your technical SEO signals with JavaScript and your content with JavaScript, then Googlebot has to actually render the page in order to see that. And rendering a page is much more costly than fetching a page, which they do initially. Now, Google has gotten a lot better with this, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect, and neither means that we should assume that this will always be the case. So we can't make our content JavaScript dependent or our technical SEO signals JavaScript dependent. We should always inject the critical mass of our content and technical signals into the initial HTML code that does not require JavaScript to render.
So is this an issue for SEO on the edge? Because there are many SEOs working in large enterprises that are working with CMSs that are maybe up to 10 years old or so and can't do certain relatively simple things. And if they want to make changes to elements such as titles or meta descriptions, then they may feel forced to use JavaScript to do this without relying on an IT team to update the CMS. Is this an issue?
Yes, it is. But, and here's the big but part, working on the edge with cloud workers or, service workers, etc., it's a great way to test things. But you have to keep in mind, this is not the final solution. This is not the final way of presenting the content down the line. This is a good way to build a case, to experiment, to see what works, what doesn't work, without having to involve the IT team. But once you have the answer to that question, what works, and what doesn't work. Then involve your IT team and try to make it part of the actual code base, because you don't want that dependency to be long-term. Also, you build a dependency on whichever cloud provider you use on the edge, which basically means that if you make any changes there, or if they have any issues, or they have any changes within their code base, that might actually negatively impact your ability to serve the right signals. So, and this may happen overnight without you noticing initially. And this can have huge impact, especially in larger enterprises. So yes, feel free to use this as an experiment. But again, it should not be a long-term dependency. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're talking about site speed in general. So are there other elements that you'd like to highlight? I mean, it could be server and hosting, could be file types, maybe plugins.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the key things so we see a lot of people and a lot of SEOs, they optimize for site speed on the front end. So less kilobytes in CSS files or JavaScript files, things like that. There's still things that they can further improve. Like, for example, how do you load your JavaScript? When do you load your JavaScript? That kind of stuff. When do you load your CSS? Have above default critical CSS preloaded and non-critical CSS loaded afterwards. Stuff like that. Which fonts do you use? How many fonts do you use? To be honest, system fonts nowadays are fine. Why load an extra font if a system font will do as well? Keep in mind that system fonts are often designed for readability. So in other words, your content will be presented really well and is very readable with the default system font. So, designers hate me for this, by the way, because they want to load more custom fonts to give the unique impression of a website, the logo and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, I would prefer to load that then as a CSV file rather than a cacheable one. So as with a separate file path, rather than inject it into the HTML or use another font to use this. Because if you can use the CSV file to give the same impression of what the font will do, that's going to be smaller likelihood and more editable as a vector. So this is something that is much more useful long-term. Now, when we're talking about what they can do in addition, and I'm talking about webmasters, website owners, as well as SEOs, is also look at the backend. It's incredible how many people don't actually look at the crawl stats within Google Search Console and don't look at how fast their average response time to Googlebot is. We see a lot of websites where the average response time to Googlebot is above 200 milliseconds. And ideally, we want, especially for larger sites, you want this under 100 or under 50. Why so high? The lower you have this, the faster Google can crawl your website.
Now, one additional factor that SEOs don't necessarily initially consider is traffic volume. There could be certain businesses that have significant peaks, generally e-commerce sites around Christmas or Black Friday days. So how does an SEO forecast the impact that significant increases in traffic volume may have on site performance?
So, well, it's hard to do, obviously, but if you want to forecast, you can use previous data, see how your site was performing at that time, measure over time how site improvements, site speed improvements have improved a certain conversion rate, and then apply that to a potential forecast of what you expect in the future. When we're talking about this as well, it's important probably to use sources like Chrome User Experience Report, where you get real user metrics. Now, it's an important side note in that regard, because these metrics are collected on a Chrome basis, meaning that if you have a lot of Safari users or Apple users, this data may not be that relevant for you or may be biased towards the non-Apple users. So that's something to keep in mind when working with the Chrome User Experience Report. But that having said, these are real user metrics, and you can access how your website has been doing over time and how much things have improved. And there's most definitely room for improvement. These things are based on, this report is based on the Core Web Vitals. And the Core Web Vitals, we're getting a new one, or at least it's already there, but it's going to be the next Core Web Vital. Well, they deprecate another one early next year being 2024. So in 2024, interaction to next paint is going to be a major Core Web Vital to optimize for. Right now, we're talking about 77% or so of the websites are having a good score on that regard. But that means that a lot do not. And if we look, for example, at a combination of how many websites have at the moment a good cumulative layout score, a good largest contentful paint score, and a good interaction to next paint score, then we're talking about an average of about 40 to 50%, meaning 50% of the websites do not have a good score of the three combined. So there's a lot of optimization still possible.
Yeah, I was just going to move on to core web vitals, actually. And the challenge with scores is you're always wondering, how much effort do I put into improving this and what impact is it going to have? So if you see scores on for something like largest contentful paint, how do you know how much is good enough and how much effort you should put into improving this versus maybe how your competitors may be doing?
Yeah, it's good to compare to your competitors in this way to see like, okay, if they're doing a lot better and they're ranking also a lot better, this may be one of those factors where they outperform you, and improving that may also help you over time. It's important to keep in mind, though, that a lot of the data needs to be confirmed by Google and also by Googlebot in a way of like, they have to recrawl your website. They need to see the website is faster, that kind of stuff. So we need to improve the backend as well. That's very important in that regard. And one of the key things that a lot of people forget is that large contentful paint, for example, depends on how fast you load some of the resources. So the backend is still important in that regard. And this is something to keep in mind. Also, how big do you make your packages? How complicated do you make your packages? How do you code your packages? This is where cumulative layout shift and interaction to next paint comes in. This can all be improved. Now, how do you measure the success that comes out of that, or how much you should invest in that? It depends on your current scores. If your scores aren't okay, then that may not be your primary focus on site speed, to focus specifically on the core web vitals, but rather to focus on what else can we improve, like the backend. Like, how is our response time? That would be my first time to first byte. I would look at that straight away, see like, what is your time to first byte on average? Because this is another web vital, by the way, that is also tracked. It's not a core web vital, but a lot of the other signals depend on that time to first byte. Because if your time to first byte is slow, everything else is going to be slow too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you touched on JavaScript earlier on as well. Is that something that impacts first input delay?
Input delay, so first input delay is first of all going to be deprecated as a core web vital. It'll still be around, but 95% of the websites are fine with that particular signal. So it's not as useful anymore, which is why they started looking at the next one. The first input delay, well, that's come from different sources, and JavaScript can have an impact there too. Yes, it depends on how the page renders and when it's available, when the forms are ready, etc.
Understood. And cumulative layout shift, that's still going to be key in 2024.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you want to test how your website performs on that front, or especially if you have some bad scores and you want to identify what the issue is, you can check out my website, the CLS Debugger.
Superb. Okay, so if an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now to spend more time focusing on improving site speed in 2024?
Yeah, so if at the moment you're doing something like buying links for PageRank, then I would stop immediately. Use that budget instead to improve the site speed of your website, because those links, you're not going to benefit from that anyway. And you even risk a penalty with that. And it's wasted money. To be very frank and very simple, if you pay for links for PageRank purposes, you're basically tossing money away. And you rather spend that money on something more useful like site speed.
Or even worse, renting links.
Yes, that's even worse. That's absolutely worse. But it does happen, and especially in competitive industries, and it's really a waste of time. It's like, look at your room, look at the trash bucket, the trash bin in your room. Now take your wallet, toss it in there. That's what you're doing.
Could it not be argued that buying links is just priming the pump to begin with? You don't have to do it forever, but maybe just to get Google comfortable with who you are, what your brand is, what it represents, and then stop buying links after that.
So there's a distinction between what type of links to buy. That's why I mentioned if you buy links for PageRank purposes. If you, on the other hand, buy links for converting traffic, you don't do it for PageRank, you add no follow, etc. And then it's perfectly fine. Because that's the way that you actually benefit from the links. And keep in mind, the web is built on links. The invention of the World Wide Web is the actual link. Because before that, Tim Berners-Lee is the one who invented the web. His invention was the hyperlink. That is what enables the web. The clicking from one document to the next. That is what enables the World Wide Web. And before that, we had hypermedia, different documents, etc., images, documents, and whatever. And we could search, but within a computer, like you search on a command line. But we did not have a way to navigate from one document to the next document from within the document. And that was the invention of the World Wide Web. So it's important to keep in mind, links are the cornerstone of what we consider to be the World Wide Web or the internet. For most people, the World Wide Web is the internet. Of course, internet is bigger, but for most people that is. And the links are the key, the cornerstone of that invention. And without it, there is no web. And that's also why Google initially put importance to that with PageRank algorithms and stuff. It's also why we have menus on our websites to allow people to navigate our websites. Linking and link building itself is not a problem. It is doing it for PageRank purposes to manipulate our SERPs. That is, in the eyes of Google and other search engines, by the way, not desirable. So if we do it for converting traffic, there's a benefit there. You're not wasting your money there because you're actually getting traffic that converts. So you're actually generating business with that. So there's a distinction between the type of link building. When we're talking about link building for PageRank, by all means, please stop that, invest it elsewhere like SiteSpeed. If it, on the other hand, is link building for traffic converting links, sure, go ahead, go for it. But be sure to keep in mind, this isn't for link juice. This isn't for PageRank. This is for converting traffic.
Fili is an SEO expert and you can find him over at SEO.services. Fili, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Thank you very much.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at SEOin2024.com.